I am just thrilled that you came out tonight for this. Happy Earth Day to you all. I'm in a good mood today. I just came from the Ecology Action Centre's grand opening of their new building on Fern Lane, and what a great event that was. I didn't get invited to New York to sign any climate deal today, so I'm here, and I guess you weren't invited either. So we'll talk together tonight about Nova Scotia and a green economy here. I'm going to talk for a while. We'll have later on some refreshments coming in, and let me just add that I'm just thrilled to see not only people from university world, but a whole bunch of people, many I know from the non-university world, the regular world, and I really do appreciate you coming today. Even a mayoral candidate for Halifax, of all things. So, thank you. I'm going to talk today about starting off with a little review of something that I've worked on for many years. And is that visible back there? It looks a bit dim. I think we're going to have to turn the light down a bit there. So I'm going to start off with a passion of mine, which is looking at fisheries in Nova Scotia and fisheries around the world, but in particular the fishery in this part of the world. And part of the material I'm using here, and this is still rather dim, but if you can see down at the bottom, there's credits to Nova Scotia Archives, where there's an amazing, this is not exactly the topic of this presentation, but there's an amazing collection of archival photographs available through the Nova Scotia Archives. And so some of these photos are taken from that source. So we have, of course, in Nova Scotia a long history in the fishery. It goes back roughly 15,000 years. 15,000 years of Mi'kmaq history in Nova Scotia of fishing activity. And more recently, of course, 500 or so years since Europeans came to the coast here. So we've had this long history of fishing activity off the coast here. And we know that for hundreds, even thousands of years, we had a sustainable situation in the fishery. But at some point, we started to get into a scenario of larger and larger boats and perhaps less and less thought about the environment. And we've had what this graph indicates was, in the 1990s, one of the largest collapses of a natural resource anywhere in the world. An amazing drop, not just in the 1990s, which is this point here, but actually in the 70s and 80s, for various causes that I'm not going to go into tonight. But we've experienced here in Nova Scotia lessons from misuse of our natural resources. Well, we've also, as we've learned that there was indeed a future in fish. This is an article I wrote not long after the collapse of that cod fishery in the 1990s. There was and there is a future in fish. I'll come back to that later on today. There's technology we've learned that is sustainable technology, and we've learned something over time. We've learned that you have to take care of the environment. This is from Bear River First Nation, some efforts to rehabilitate fish in streams in Bear River. And we've learned some ideas about adding value to the fishery resource. You might know Off the Hook, an Ecology Action Centre initiative here in Halifax and around the province. So we've learned some lessons, and what have we been able to do after that disaster in the 1990s? We've been able to make some efforts to sustain fishing communities around the province. On land, it's been somewhat similar, perhaps not with the same dramatic collapse that we've seen in other in the fishery setting. We've had a long history of 15,000 years of living on the land. The Mi'kmaq have harvested the forest resources over time. We've had mechanistic harvesting in a sustainable way historically in Nova Scotia. But then we've sometimes gone a little overboard with our land-based resource use, with clear cutting, with some pollutants that we know from Boat Harbor and the Pictou area here. And the effect of that in Nova Scotia has been that our little spot down here in the Maritimes, which is the only place in Canada with the Acadian forest area, has been substantially decimated over time. So that mixed forest has been lost as we go along. There's still some primary forest, but not as much as there used to be. But again, we've learned some things about sustainable use of forests and our land resources. And we've innovated as time has gone on. So this is the Medway Community Forest proposal. And I'll come back again to this wonderful innovation in Nova Scotia of community forests. Ways of connecting the people and the natural resources in new ways that we might not have tried previously, although community forest is a big deal in other parts of the world. So that's a bit of a natural resource-oriented startup to what I'd like to say to you tonight about the green economy. And the points I wanted you to stick with for now have to do with sustainable use of resources, what happens when we go wrong, and what happens when we learn from our mistakes and figure out things in a better way. So the green economy is a term that's been popularized just fairly recently. You may or may not have come across this before. This is from the United Nations Division for Sustainable Development, one of these word clouds that are very popular these days that basically try to show all the different words that come up when talking about this idea of a green economy. And I just want to give you a little idea of what the United Nations Environment Program says about a green economy. So I'm just going to read this for a moment here, a couple of sentences. A green economy is one that results in improved human well-being and social equity while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. In its simplest expression, a green economy is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. In a green economy, growth in income and employment are driven by public and private investments that reduce carbon emissions, pollution, enhance energy and resource efficiency, and prevent loss of biodiversity and ecosystem impact. So that's a quote from United Nations. Really, in a sense, then, it's all about the sustainable development idea, recognizing that long-term economic success requires both a healthy environment and a healthy society. So in practice, individual pieces, businesses, industries, whole economic sectors are transformed to be cleaner, more sustainable, and more efficient in their use of energy and natural resources, making them stronger in the global marketplace. Stronger, not weaker, because they're able to compete with the trends that you see, especially in Europe, for example, of demands for more sustainable products. So that's the nutshell of the green economy. And what I'd like to talk a bit about tonight is how are we doing in moving in that direction? And a bit more about what that direction might look like for the Nova Scotia economy. So just to step back for a moment, in the 1980s, something called the Brundtland Commission made up that term sustainable development. And it caught on. It was a big international United Nations commission. It caught on from the 1980s to now, so 30 years or so. And basically every government, every business, every organization will now say that they're doing sustainable development. What that now, that jargon of sustainable development has transformed a bit into different terms, and green economy is one of those. This triangle is the only mathematics in my talk tonight, although I do confess to being originally a mathematician, but no math here, except a triangle to remind us that there are three prongs, three pillars to this sustainability idea: the environment, the economy, the community, or the society, if you like. So environment and economy linked together in a green economy, but as that United Nations term, quote, referred to, the community, the society, the equity, that's also part of the picture. In fact, just a few months ago, and this talk could be all about this diagram right here, just a matter of a few months ago in September 2015, the United Nations embarked on a new initiative called the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is now going to put that whole terminology of sustainable development back in the forefront. It's been there all along since that commission in the 1980s, but now it's here in a rather complex set of 17 different goals that are going to be monitored internationally and in particular countries over the next 10 to 15 years. These tend to be oriented around the targets aiming at the year 2030. And I won't go through all of these, but I'm just putting this as background to the initiatives that are out there that lead to this green economy idea. And indeed, there are international initiatives. This, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is the cover of a United Nations Environment Program report all about moving towards an inclusive green economy. It's almost becoming, this term green economy, almost becoming like sustainable development, a term that everyone needs to be talking about, or almost everyone, as I'll get to in a moment. In Canada, same thing. These are two organizations, non-governmental organizations in Canada, Green Budget Coalition and the Green Economy Network, two NGOs that put out their statements, their recommendations for the budget that came federally in just a matter of a few weeks ago. So that initiative on green economy is there. And so this budget, you might recall, the first budget of this new government, the CBC said, and quoting here, Liberals keep most of their green election promises in first budget. This was interesting. I'm not giving a politics talk tonight, but this is interesting because I want to look at this federal, just very briefly at what's happening federally and then turn to Nova Scotia. So federally, we have the CBC referring to Canada must develop green infrastructure or lose out as the global economy shifts. That's coming back to that point I was making earlier. And the finance minister saying some believe we must choose between a strong economy and a clean environment. They are simply wrong. By the way, that's the kind of words, the kind of statement that you would have seen from an environmental organization a few years back, and now you got the finance minister saying that. Well, you know, of course, the proof is in the pudding, so we wait and see, but $2 billion for a clean water and wastewater fund and several hundreds for climate efforts and energy efficiency programs. Those are examples of what was in that latest budget. So federally, in Canada, there are these green economy initiatives. So let's turn to Nova Scotia. Here in Nova Scotia, we have what is one of the most impressive pieces of legislation anywhere in Canada, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. It is a piece of provincial law. It was brought in some years ago by a Conservative government. It was implemented further by an NDP government, and so far it's been still in place under a Liberal government. it's amazing because it sets hard targets. You might have heard about targets being set in the climate negotiations in Paris and various other international realms of setting targets and agreeing to pursue those targets. When the target is in legislation, that creates a very interesting force in Nova Scotia. And we see that in particular in terms of, well, for me, two particular areas. A move toward renewable energy to try to meet a specified target in this legislation, and a move to protected areas, so more of the land being protected in the province. So both of those reflecting actual target, not just targets, but hard targets in this legislation. We also have a whole realm of reports and strategies and policies at the provincial level that get at basically how are we going to green the economy in terms of everything from climate change impacts to natural resources to parks and protected areas. So we have a lot of material to work with in Nova Scotia. We also have the Ivany report from a couple of years back. And it's hard in this province to have not heard somewhere of the Ivany report because it's being talked about almost as much as that term sustainable development was talked about for 20 years or 30 years now. The Ivany report, well, I gave a talk 2 years ago. This is the 2-year anniversary of myself standing here at St. Mary's University giving a talk about green economy. I hope I'm not going to repeat myself today, but I will just mention one thing that I said 2 years ago, which is that the Ivany report did not really do much. It did not really focus to the extent I would have liked on this whole idea of a green economy. But it had some very good points and material in it. For example, it pointed out that poor regulations have failed us in the past. Sydney tar ponds would be a classic example of poor regulations. So the Ivany report, with a lot of credibility behind it, made some important points about poor regulations failing us in the past. Also, that protecting ecosystems and promoting sustainable resource use is central to revitalizing our rural economy. The Ivany report from 2 years ago also pointed out some areas of success in the province. I'm not mentioning them all here, but I'll just mention 3 that they referred to. Feed-in tariffs, community feed-in tariffs to promote renewable energy development at a local level. That was an initiative that we've had fairly unique. In fact, it's considered quite unique in Nova Scotia. The Nova Scotian rules and approach compared with other locations. Community forests has been an initiative that the Ivany report referred to as one of our models of success. And the small boat fishery, the coastal fishery generating employment and spin-off economic benefits all up and down the coast of Nova Scotia. So those were 3 particular models of success that that were pointed out by Ivany. And basically, although they didn't really refer to it explicitly, ingredients of a green economy strategy. The other aspect of the Ivany report that I like to point out, and I did point this out 2 years ago, and I'm going to do it again very quickly now. The Ivany report did a survey of Nova Scotians and found that Nova Scotians say the economy is important, but our quality of life and quality of our environment are more important. Very interesting, because this Ivany report was all about the new economy for Nova Scotia. It wasn't about environment and caring about nature or something like that. It was about the economy. But what Nova Scotians said to that commission about the economy was they actually care more about their quality of life and their local environment. There were some other points made actually about the green economy in the Ivany report, referring to it as a source of employment, value added, and enhancement of community strength and resilience. It also referred to it as providing opportunities for business development. Much more recently, and this brings us almost up to date time-wise, the One Nova Scotia initiative that the Ivany Report initiated continued on with a high-level panel that included the Premier and the two leaders of the opposition in Nova Scotia and a range of other business and other people. Their report came out very recently called We Choose Now, so that comes from that now or never idea in the Ivany Report. So We Choose Now is the name, and they highlight certain areas of emphasis. Now, this has not been as much in the news, perhaps, I would say, unless you happen to find the news about this particular report. It didn't get the same splash as the Ivany Report did, in my opinion, anyway. Like the Ivany Report, a green economy is not really central to this We Choose Now, One Nova Scotia report. So to sum up, two reports, green economy not really central to either one. There is in this one, in particular, two areas. One, there's some aspects of sustainable resource use under this going global heading, and there's certainly some talk about the marine environment under Nova Scotia's Ocean Advantage. So it's there, but it's not central to this report, just as it wasn't to the Ivany Report. So my basic suggestion in the talk tonight is that a green economy can actually be the central focus of our thinking about the Nova Scotia economy. So if that wasn't clear from the title of the talk, that's the idea. So that's where I'm going with this. Now, a lot happened in the year 2014. The Ivany Report came out. I gave that talk, I mentioned it 2 years ago, and there was published in 2014, August I think it was, Nova Scotia's proposed greener economy strategy. This came from the provincial government. They laid out 4 priority areas, and this is available, so you can find it on the Nova Scotia government's website. It's not too long a report. You can have a nice look through it, and I'm only going to give you the 4 priority areas here. Well, these 4 areas, the first one you wouldn't know that this was about a greener economy. Something about value of regulatory certainty for innovation and cost predictability. Doesn't sound, particularly focused on green, but that's just the heading, and you can get into it and see why they think of this as relevant. This was entirely done by provincial staff, so these were the priorities that they came up with. The clean technology sector, again, looking at economic growth ideas. This is an area that has potential, and in fact, what was until very recently called ESANS, the Environmental Services Association of Nova Scotia, it's now called Environmental Services Association Maritimes, so it's broadened to include the 3 provinces, is an association of environmental consultants and technologists and others that are basically developing clean technology sector. So it's a good area to work in. Energy and resource efficiency, we like that. That's always good. And accelerate the greening of companies' products and services. So in itself, these are good measures. They are perhaps what I might call technical measures, as opposed to visions of where we can take our provincial economy. But that might be a good idea, because the Ivany Report and the One Nova Scotia We Choose Now reports are perhaps somewhat more visionary. Now, following this, also in 2014, the Nova Scotia Roundtable on Environment and Sustainable Prosperity. I don't know if you knew that there was such a roundtable. I mean, it's very, very good people on it, and it's a very interesting body, but, and actually it does hold consultations at times. So, and indeed, very smart people on it, because they actually wrote a review of that governmental greener economy strategy. Their main point was that that strategy needed to be linked to this piece of legislation that I started off with in terms of Nova Scotia as being an amazing piece of law that can really drive drive us into a leadership position in the future. And in some ways, it already has. So what they're pointing out here is that this rather technical kind of greener economy strategy needs to be linked in with the changes that are taking place within EGSPA, that Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. They also mention a number of items, and again, this is a report that's not too long. You can get through it fairly easily, and it has a lot of ideas in it. I just picked 5 of them to show you here. In response to the Ivany report's interest in growing the population of the province, the Nova Scotia Roundtable suggests attracting more farmers and also preserving agricultural land for that farming activity. Encourage electric cars and public transportation. So these are specific aspects. Revenue neutral, equitable carbon tax. That's an interesting point. That if you're ever wondering, does anybody want a carbon tax in Nova Scotia? Well, the Nova Scotia Roundtable, which includes business leaders and consultants and academics and others, they want it. Encourage more green tech, well that's, and renewable energy, that also was reflected in the greener economy strategy. And meet the EGSPA goal for waste reduction. Now, I'm going to come back to these goals as we go along. So, you might know that there was a budget out this week, and that was very handy for me giving this talk today, because if we're moving to a green economy in Nova Scotia, what better place to see this emerging than in the Nova Scotia budget this week? The transformation and the vision of moving to a green economy may well be in the budget. It maybe the words green economy are all the way through the budget. No, actually, the 2 words don't show up in the budget. The budget speech or the budget highlights or the government business plan related to the budget. I didn't look through every word in the whole, because it's a lot of documents, but I looked through these 3 sort of primary ones that reflect our vision for the future. No green economy there. So, okay. But maybe they used other words, like talked about natural resources perhaps and nature. No. But maybe they talked about the environment. Like surely, like there's going to be something about the environment. And there was. Policies that create the environment for growth. That's a phrase in the budget. So environment is in there. This is like I'm a researcher, and this is what I do. I do research, so I was researching the budget this week. Here's another term that's in the budget: create an environment that makes growth possible. Now, there's nothing wrong necessarily with an environment that makes growth possible. In fact, a green economy would be an environment that makes growth possible. Growth that would be what we call green growth. So not a lot on green economy or environment, but sustainability is another term that relates to the idea of environment and green economy. So perhaps sustainability is in there, and it is. Fiscal sustainability is important, and it's in the budget. So this is not a budget, you get the idea here, that's really grasping the vision of a green economy. That doesn't mean it's a bad budget, and in fact, there's a couple things in it that I mean, every budget pretty much has something in it that you're going to like. I think it's great that they're expanding high-speed internet to more rural communities, and investing in the creative economy and encouraging forestry innovation and especially social enterprise. It's like, innovations, entrepreneurship that has a social goal. And who could argue with investing in wineries? I mean, well, you might, but anyway. And certainly sewer and water infrastructure. You remember the federal budget has several $1 billion for sewer and water infrastructure. And I can tell you, I was on the Halifax Water Commission for a couple of years, and we really need sewer and water infrastructure. So that's a good thing. So I mean, it's not that there aren't any good things, but as an overall vision or strategy for a green economy, there's room to progress, shall we say. So what I'd like to do is give you now a few of my ideas of strategies for a green economy for Nova Scotia. And feel free, when we get to discussion, feel free to argue these points. That would be great. So just back to this idea of linking environment, economy, and community. You'll see this recurring as I go along here. So first of all, a few basic strategies. Build on our biggest strength. So I used this term and I thought, okay, sometimes we like to say the biggest strength is our people, which is a good thing, because we're all people and we think we're pretty good. So, that could be our biggest strength. Or it might be the ocean, because you see the ocean there. Or it might be boardwalks is our greatest strength, is building boardwalks. But I don't know. Anyway, the point is, what I claim is our greatest strength in Nova Scotia is that we're a fairly small province, and it's easy to connect the city mice and the country mice. The city mouse and the country mouse. It's easy to get out of the city. It's easy to get into nature like this. I think that's a really important point to keep in mind. Another big strategy, building on our values. These are Mi'kmaq drummers and reflecting certain values, but we have lots of, other values as well. Reflecting our values, and they might be Nova Scotian values, but they could also be a local community's values. Values can vary from one place to another. Learning from our history. What can we learn from those natural resource problems that I was describing earlier? What can we learn from ups and downs over time? This is some, again, from the Nova Scotia Archives, a picture of coal mining in some early days. What can we learn as we go along? Valuing our resources. We know resources have value, or they wouldn't be resources, but making sure we're getting the most value from our resources. What can we do to add to the value? And one point I just want to highlight over here with this nice picture of a fishing boat by the dock there. We get a lot of benefit in Nova Scotia from that small boat fishery. You remember those three success stories that I described earlier? The ComFit feed-in tariffs for encouraging renewable energy involvement and encouraging community involvement in supplying energy. Okay, ComFit. The small boat fishery and the community forests. Now, we still have a small boat fishery, and it generates huge tourism benefits that often get forgotten. The fact that that boat's there and is surviving and going out fishing aids our tourism sector enormously. So we have to start thinking not just of individual sectors, but of the whole interaction together. By the way, in case I forget, have people heard of that ComFit community feed-in tariffs that I was mentioning a moment ago, where basically a lot of different communities or different organizations can help to build up our renewable energy capability in the province? It got canceled a few weeks ago. It's one of the saddest things. It was almost really unique in the country and a model for the future. It got canceled. Community forests, we're really getting into community forests, but watch out. I'm hearing rumors that community-based forests may be losing ground in the last couple of years to, again, to this industrial model that we've tended to have all along. So some of the success stories that the Ivany report highlighted are either canceled or threatened, but we still have this small boat fishery, and I think we really have to value, and just like apples in the Annapolis Valley, valuing our resources, not just caring about them, but adding value to them. So the secondary processing, for example. Greening the urban economy. A lot of people live in cities in Nova Scotia, and it's increasing percentage. What do we do in cities? It's easy to talk about parks. And by the way, there's going to be an initiative that the Sierra Club and the City of Halifax are running right across the street here in the Gorsebrook Park area to improve that park and build better stormwater management and so on. There's lots of good green stuff going on. But I mean the green economy. What do you do in the city, in Halifax, to green the urban economy? And there are things we can do. Okay, I'll say it. Lil McGregor is at the back with Wooden Monkey. And Lil gave a talk in my class recently and pointed out how you can reduce waste in restaurants. Okay, well, I don't know much about restaurants, but there's ways to reduce waste in restaurants that could be for all restaurants and all hotels that have food services, and that's just food. And then you can talk about what about electricity use and what about other uses in the city, in the urban area here. The Ecology Action Center has this newly renovated building in the North End. We were just hearing today that it's 50% larger than it was before its renovation. 50% larger in area, and it now uses 22% less energy because of the retrofitting, the energy efficiency it has. So there's ways to do things in the urban area that are good for the economy as well. I want to mention, just as a kind of a package here, knowledge, innovation, and creativity. I don't know if those three go together, but there they are. The knowledge sector, we have so much knowledge, so many knowledge sources in the province, like universities where we are now, but also like the Unabomber Institute of Natural Resources in Cape Breton, where Eskasoni First Nation. So, you know, there's lots of knowledge sources. There's lots of ways we can innovate, and the creative sector, like the Stan Rogers Folk Festival there, and Ship's Company Theatre there, lots of ways that we can use our creative economy as a green economy. So creative economy is largely a green economy just by its nature. And I want to spend a bit of time on this particular topic, the power of local communities. So when I showed you that triangle that talked about environment and economy and community, I could have just said environment and economy. That's a common way of talking about things. How do we link the environment and the economy better? But for me, the community is one of the particular angles that's crucial to be focusing on. And as you can see in this map here, there's lots of communities in Nova Scotia. I'm just going to give you a little example of a few that I just picked because they matter to me, and I know that you could pick some other ones. First of all, this is not so much a community, but a community strategy. And well, there's one person in the audience that's going to recognize this. It's called the Parks Panel Report that was done for the Nova Scotia Natural Resources Strategy. And in this, the three of us that were authoring this particular report for the Department of Natural Resources and the provincial government, we made a lot of recommendations, but the two that I just want to highlight here, because I'm talking about local communities around Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia's park system, keep in mind this is talking about provincial parks in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia's park system needs to be seen within a community-centered, place-based context, connecting provincial parks and other local assets in the community. The natural and cultural heritage in a park should be linked to relevant local museums or other attractions, beneficial for educational linkages and for tourism. For tourism, in other words, our provincial parks attract people and our museums attract people, but isn't there a way of doubling the scope of that by increasing the linkages between them? And similarly, involving municipalities can create partnerships and increase local participation in development and management. So in other words, communities have a role in economic development that links to something as separate from our usual economic thinking as parks. The Eastern Shore has, and again, here I'm going to just highlight a few locations that I find inspiring, but I must say that I'm embarking on a project to crowdsource from as many people as possible stories around the province and around the world of inspiring examples of linking together environment and economy in a green economy sense. So it's a new project, and these are a few examples. The Deanery and the restored Musquodoboit Harbor School on the Eastern Shore. Example of community coming together to do something really innovative, and actually, I should point out, also having a community forest that they're managing, as well as the Deanery and the Eastern Shore Forest Watch as an NGO that's looking at forests there. Bear River First Nation, I mentioned before, again, for me, an inspiring example of linking together the culture with Stone Bear here is a campsite that does support work for Indigenous youth at risk, but also is training in, so it's an enterprise that's also part of the economy and training for living off the land in particular. The Bear River Cultural Center also, again, part of the tourism activity in the province. Port Mattoon Bay in the South Shore of Nova Scotia. I'm conscious that there's some people in the room here that didn't know that their communities are going to be shown here, but there you go. Port Mattoon and the communities around Port Mattoon Bay engaging in a wonderful exercise in protecting their local environment, visioning for the future of what do they want their community's future to look like, and where is that heading? What's the route to the future? And one of my suggestions is that's that kind of community visioning of the future, of what a green economy would look like, is exactly the kind of measure that the provincial government could catch on to and promote more. Here's another example where some people in the room are going to recognize this from Louisbourg Seafoods in Louisbourg and Cape Breton. Danny, there it is. An initiative, Danny Hansen from Louisbourg Seafoods is back there. C++, an initiative that Louisbourg Seafoods, a processing seafood company, created along with Cape Breton University and with others, which I can't remember right now, to basically try to link together entrepreneurs and innovators with the seafood business. The seafood business that's been around, well, or the seafood that's been around for 15,000 years in the province, 500 years since the Europeans came. One of the big industries of the province, sort of traditional sector, linking in with, and you know, here's a picture which I stole off of Danny's website there of you know, a nice community with some fishing boats. That's the sort of traditional fishery thing, you know, that we think about. But now initiatives to link entrepreneurs and innovators in with this sector. So again, inspiring cases of green economy, because you know this won't last long if your fish disappear. So you got to be sustainable with your fish if this whole thing is going to work out. But you want to innovate at the same time. I mentioned about the Ecology Action Center. This is an architect's drawing that's off their website as well. But but now you can see the real thing up in the North End, Halifax. As of today, their building's open. And the reason I put, it's not about the building, although as a green initiative, this is a pretty nice building. But for me, the amazing thing about the Ecology Action Center is it reflects, as an organization, two key aspects. First of all, it lives in the North End of Halifax. So it's an anchor to the community and connects to the community in North End Halifax. But the second aspect that I really so much admire about their work is that they are always looking at the links of the environment and the people. If it's the fishery, if it's farming and food, if it's urban development in the North End or anywhere in Halifax, it's the people and the environment connected together. Not all environmental organizations think that way, and I'm just really pleased that we have it here in Halifax, and in Nova Scotia, this kind of group. So it sounds like a sales pitch, but this is about the community aspect. So as an environmental group, they work with communities like Cheticamp, Digby Neck, St. Margaret's Bay, all over the province. And by the way, they have a little celebration going on at Lion and Bright on Agricola Street tonight. So once you're done here, there you go. That's my little advertisement for them. I mentioned about a research project. And although this isn't just Nova Scotia, I want to just mention this Community Conservation Research Network because you might find it interesting. This is basically, we are trying to look around the world, and you can perhaps see some of our sites that we're particularly focusing on here, including Nova Scotia. We're looking at around the world at how communities can be empowered to balance the environment and the economy, to create their own green economy in a local way. If you'd like to explore, it's communityconservation.net. The basic idea of this initiative, as I mentioned before, is to gather together examples from around the world of inspiring cases where this kind of effort is taking place, but also cases where it's not working out so well. And why is that? In some cases, it might be that the community is keen, but the government, the higher level government, hasn't caught on to the idea. They can't get their governmental heads around, and this is not negative about governments, but it's just a reality that does happen sometimes. The government folks can't get their heads around the idea of what community can do, the power of community. So we're looking at that all around the world, but in particular in Nova Scotia. Now, just to wrap up, I want to mention a couple of things that the provincial government can do to help along this, first of all, this process of community engagement. Consider municipalities a resource, not a burden. So that's a kind of, doesn't look like a green economy statement, but you have to empower communities and municipalities, you have to look at them not as something to amalgamate together and try to get rid of, but as an actual resource to help out. Support community visioning and future planning, the kind that I was mentioning that happens in some of these inspiring communities all around the province. Support community innovations. When we say the word innovation, there are some who think this means creating a new gadget. There's nothing wrong with gadgets, I kind of like them, but you can also innovate new ways of doing things in community, new green economy initiatives at the community level. And in fact, one suggestion I would like to see in the province is a fund for green community economies. It takes money, but maybe some of the money that always is available for a company to come in from outside the province maybe could go to support communities in the province to try out something. More leadership, not so much in terms of empowering communities, but a few points I want to finish with here. The green economy needs to be mainstreamed or brought in to the core of what's going on in the government. We need a roadmap, this is sort of jargony term, but like a plan for greening all sectors and different parts of the economy. How do we do that? Embracing the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act and setting bold new targets. We already have targets in EGSPA, but we could use more. And the idea is to think about leadership. Think about how we can become a leader. And in fact, we have been a leader really in the world, but certainly across Canada, on waste reduction. The green bins we have in Halifax, you don't find them everywhere. You find them in more places now than you did when they were first introduced in Halifax. But we were a leader, and we can be a leader, again, on waste reduction, but we can be a leader in other areas as well. Value-added natural resource use, restore COMFIT, I mentioned that. Don't lag behind on a carbon tax. If we want to have a green economy, we've got to bite the bullet and start to play with the grown-ups And the grown-ups are talking carbon taxes now. So, we can't hide behind or under a stone too long on that. And support knowledge in creative sectors. So the green economy, as somebody in Halifax says, be bold, be visionary, create enthusiasm. And it's not just an environment niche. This is really how we can work things overall, make money, and empower communities. That's my story for tonight, and I'd welcome your comments and questions. Thank you. Yes, please.
I guess my comment question is on carbon tax and ways to do it and ways to not do it. And like so many of the times we think of it as something that's going to negatively impact our economy. But as with all of these initiatives, it really doesn't have to. And have you looked at things like the carbon fee and dividend model, where it would be revenue neutral and all the money is going back to people, and that kind of stimulates the economy?
Yeah, it's a good point. First of all, yes, the British Columbia carbon tax is considered to be working quite smoothly, not a lot of complaints. The one thing I'd say about it is it's not enough. Right. You can't just have you can't just say you have a carbon tax and that's enough. It's probably, I forget the numbers now, but 5 to 10 times lower than it needs to be ultimately. So, and I may have that wrong, but it's far from where it needs to be. But it's there and it's a start as long as it can move in the right direction. It's revenue neutral. The one extra point that the United Nations Environment Program, the quote I was giving, and so the recommendation from the Nova Scotia Roundtable was to make sure that you have an equitable arrangement. So, like you say, the money's got to go to the right place. Nobody wants to hear it's just going into government funds. Unless it's, if in BC they convince people that it's revenue neutral. So what that meant was that some other tax or other fee was dropped down. And, for those, you're trying to get behavior. We're trying to say, we have government to do something good for us as society, right? And part of that is manipulating my behavior. And so if I see that stuff involving carbon's more expensive, but stuff involving, let's say going to the theater or movies or something, or the creative economy, is cheaper because taxes got shifted from those areas over to taxes on carbon. Okay, so maybe I drive less, but I go to more theater performances or something, or symphony or whatever. There's apparently a very good symphony performance on tonight. Thanks for being here. So yeah, very, very good point. Yes, please.
Tony, well, first of all, I would really emphasize how refreshing it has been to hear you talking this way. You don't hear this kind of discussion too often, and you're putting it very eloquently.
Thank you.
One of the points that sort of concerned me when I read the Ivany report, and it keeps coming back, is yes, you can see some interesting ideas in the Ivany report, but you don't see a lot of discussion, actually you don't see any, about working with neighbors.
Working with which, sir?
With neighbors.
Neighbors.
The problem that I see happening in Nova Scotia at the moment is a parochialism. Yeah, we're looking inside to try to do some sensible things. We're trying to hold people, particularly graduate students and so on, inside the province. But how are we interfacing with New Brunswick, PEI, Quebec particularly, which is perhaps a limited window of opportunity with Quebec at the moment. At the moment, hopefully it seems to be relatively pro-federation. And that may change. It could become a wall, or could it be one of Trump's kind of walls if one's not careful. And Newfoundland. And I feel that if we're really going to progress in this province, we should be thinking much more about how we can work better with the neighboring provinces get efficiencies in areas like energy, rethink our whole educational system, really rethink it. My impression is that our post-secondary education system really needs a Royal Commission really looking ahead at a real vision. What are we producing through our educational system? Anyway, but the point I don't want to carry on and on and on, because I've got a number of points like you have, and they all tend to be pointing outside, look outside, work with the outside, and connect. And I just raise that with you and get your reaction if I may.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because as you were expressing that, I was thinking to myself that I've just finished making an argument for the provincial government to pay more attention to the local communities in the province, and even questioning this kind of rush to amalgamation, because sometimes small is beautiful, sometimes you don't actually get much efficiency by amalgamating. So I've always wondered about the numbers around amalgamation of different communities, municipalities. But I'm not an expert on that particular analysis. So I wonder about that, but I don't wonder about my logic in arguing for more attention, more support, more empowering of communities, local communities. So does that sound opposite to what you're saying, which is perhaps for Nova Scotia to look at connecting up and being more efficient in connecting with its neighbors? Well, no, there's no contradiction there, because you need a multi-level approach. There's nothing wrong. In fact, it's wonderful to get more efficient in what we do in the province here, in connecting with other provinces, with the Maritimes. I mean, we have some Maritimes-wide bodies that try to coordinate some things. Even with universities, there's a Maritimes body that makes decisions over what kind of programs are offered at universities. So there's some of that, but I'm sure not enough. So I would say both. Look for efficiencies by connecting outside. If I was advising the provincial government, look for connections outside, but look for empowering at the local level. And that would be visionary. That would be something that goes beyond just the same old. And it's not easy, and I don't have the exact costs on it at the moment, but as long as I think what we're trying to do is create economic engines and initiatives at the local level in the province, while also reducing costs as much as we can by being efficient at higher level aspects. So yeah, I think very much that those would go together. Yes, please.
I'm wondering if you can shed some light on some of the recent decisions, like scrapping the COMFIT and the lack of anything environmentally related in the budget that's not economic. So are those decisions being made on like the government's ideology right now, or is it what you think the public wants because there is an election coming up? Like, where's that divide?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think I would need to be perhaps more of a political scientist which I'm not, to really do a proper analysis of that. What I showed you, that the Ivany report told us about what Nova Scotians think. That Nova Scotians think economy is important, but put even more value on quality of life and on the environment that they have to live in. You could say that that's a pretty profound message to politicians. Are they acting on that? Do they really not believe it? Because it is possible that people say in a survey what they think somebody wants to hear. I don't think that Ivany people necessarily wanted to hear that particular line. In fact, I suspect it might have shocked them. We have the sense that everybody will say that the economy is the most important thing in our whole lives. We have that kind of ingrained in us, that because sometimes it does show up in public opinion polls. So I can't answer exactly what you're getting at there. I think that in a way, what I would like to do is get people thinking that maybe not just a niche green economy for the people that are kind of flaky thinking about that sort of thing, but a green economy as the strategy for the province would actually be a winner in creating more jobs, creating more green economic activity, and actually improving our quality of life. So how do you get that message across? Well, you know, if you like that message, then I hope this talk will maybe spur that on. Yeah.
Well, like if you look, they're opening the coal mine in Sydney again. I don't know if it's the government mentality or if it's in the public. And like, if we were going forward, is it up to us to just talk to people and get them to change? Or because maybe I think people aren't so engaged with provincial politics as it is. And municipal politics, we are on the federal level because we have superstars. But I just don't know if we want to actually achieve a change and get a green economy, where we should start. Like, if you have advice to give someone like myself, how would we go about doing it? Does that make sense? Because they're pretty, like, Stephen McNeil doesn't listen to anything. You can tell him something and it'll, I don't know. So, yeah, if you have any advice.
Well,
I think that there are initiatives that individuals can do. I mean, if you're an individual citizen or consumer, citizens can write letters and put pressure on and try to create momentum. There is, for example, in Antigonish, a small community group that's looking at green economy ideas, just right there in Antigonish. You know, so those kinds of initiatives can be done by citizens. Consumers, of course, can be talking with their grocery stores and other places about where they'd like to get their food and their purchases from. You know, there's a lot. I don't want to get into individual choices because this is not just about whether you recycle or not. It's really about a vision for the economy, and the economy sounds so amorphous, but part of the problem, I think, is that as you shift to a green economy, if we were shifting, there's a bit of fuzziness to it. Where do these jobs exactly come from? How do we know that we'll get more jobs than by mining coal, where we can say it's this number of jobs in this location, you know, there it is. So there's a certain idea of creating what's really a diverse and diffuse initiative. I'd like, with this fund for community green economies, I'd like to see 100 communities around the province engaging in something to create wealth, make money, but do it in a green way. And it's going to look different in different locations. You know, the kind, in some case, it might be some ecotourism initiative in, you know, in a particular park area, and in another place it'll be some other kind of organic farming activity. I mean, there's lots of different scenarios there.
What do the community groups look like to you in your imagination? Like you're saying, like Antigonish has a little, I know there's community groups all over the province, but are they elected? Are we supposed to go to them? Like, how, like, what are those, ideally, what do they look like to you?
Well, this is a very important question. You know, who is it? For me, I guess when I look at municipalities and communities that are within a municipality, I actually have a project at the moment that's trying to look at what kind of community initiatives have there been in envisioning for the future of their local area. But what are those communities? In some cases, we have a lot of municipalities, although there's this effort I was describing to reduce the number of municipalities in the province, but we have a lot of municipalities still. Is that the right unit? Well, it might be. At least it's a sort of a formal unit to get started with. After the cod fishery collapse, quite a few municipalities around the province got together and created maps of their assets. What are our strengths in our community? And that's a great initiative. You get a feel for what are the strengths in that location and what are you going to do with them? And how can you change as you go into the future? So it could be an informal, you know, it could be an informal kind of body. It could be a municipality. It could be a business that gets started up or exists in a local area that gets the community on side. A business that's community-based and actually draws people around it and say, yes, you know, this particular business X is one of our solutions in our local area. And it's not just rural communities. I mean, we're talking here about parts of cities, neighborhoods of cities as well, I think, can engage in this kind of practices. I wouldn't exclude neighborhoods from this thinking. Yeah, please.
Dr. Charles, I want to like to expand on this lady's question. The very question is to how do we move that way? The presentation is extremely good and it's clear, the message is clear. How do we get by on it? And I think one of our biggest problems, and we take the coal mine in Cape Breton, okay? It's a very good example. We closed the coal mines, now we're open. There's many people in Cape Breton who would like not to do that. So we put a target date, let's say, of 10 years, we're out of coal. So it gets job creation, gets public support, but it's building awareness around this so that we're not scaring the public because they believe that a green economy is less jobs, green economy is less whatever. It's the same as when we ran our C++. All the young educated people that came, was over 33, came and entered the competition. What we learned there was that their vision is not much different than the gray-haired vision. So we can take those visions and work it together between the younger generation and our generation and get behind this with one or two core examples of how it can work. And get the government behind that and get people to see how it can work and educate them, but publicly, in the open, in the communities. Like, in what size is the community? I believe Cape Breton in itself is a community. Yeah, that's a big community. So it doesn't have to be small or anything, but I think the lady is quite correct. How do we not go back, but yet create sustainability within our community and job creation, and we still have people to employ? Baby boomers are just about all retired, but a lot of them are coming back to work. And how do we get the people to buy on this? And I think it's through the good communications you're doing here, but companies have to engage you and engage some of their money to make one or two of your direct lines of implementations work, or at least be shown. And we need a leader. So that leader is right now going to be you. So we need to get industry behind it, and we have to get the younger generations just speaking, just like this lady did, and this man did on communities, and get it out there, and have a lot more of these. And I can tell you that the gray-haired people want to come to them because it's their grandchildren that's future, and I think this is the exact way to do this.
I'm glad you made the point about the children's and the grandchildren's future. I mean, that fundamentally, I think that what I'm seeing when I'm working with different communities is that's often the driving factor, is thinking into the future, right? So we need that space, you know, what social scientists call the space to think about something like the future, to actually do that visioning, that planning, and it's not easy, you know. If creating jobs and having a vibrant economy were easy, in this part of the world anyway, it would have been solved and we'd have a nice sustainable economy. But so there are different options, I guess, and there's nothing wrong with the Ivany report and the recent One Nova Scotia report in terms of laying out some good analysis. For me, I guess I'm putting this out there as a unifying vision in a sense. Ivany says we need more people and we need a stronger economy, which are both fair from a kind of objective point of view of the numbers going down and the economy going down and so on. But I think you're absolutely right. People have got to either start up initiatives, businesses that might hopefully work out, or put money into existing businesses have to invest. So there has to be the case made. You know, the standard term, the business case has to be made for these kinds of initiatives. What I'm just hoping to do is not to make the business case to businesses, but to make the case to governments as a strategy to at least explore, see what we can do, not with green economy as a niche on the side, but as a unifying, because we're an unusual place. We've got nature all around us. That's why I called it our greatest strength. We've got this environment. We all live, everybody lives in an environment in the world, but we have a kind of a special situation here, I would argue anyway. Just given the time, maybe if there was one last, somebody have one more question? Yes, and then we'll wrap up for...
I think what we're hearing from people here and what you haven't given us is actions, okay? It's fine to have a vision, and I think that there's a lot of visions floating around, but what we're dealing with is sort of basically elected governments that aren't actually putting in action what we want as citizens. And so there's a real disengagement right now. We have Nova Scotia Power that's created, that has access to a grid, somehow managed to sort of lift this from public hands into a private Emera company, and has basically disincentivized any attempts to go, basically contribute to the grid, whether it's through solar power. I mean, we saw Germany. We've seen examples all over the world where people have actually been able to, where governments have put policies in place that has built sustainable solar power type things that are feeding into the grids, and people are making money from putting their solar power into the public grid, and that was a government policy. These exist all around the world, and what we seem to have is a disenfranchisement of the know-how that, like, we have Ecology Action Center, and I really don't understand why our politicians are so backward. They're not responsible. I mean, and we haven't made them responsible. So in terms of communities, yeah, you can have 100 different little communities doing little things and cleaning up things. But what we really need our communities to do is to start electing politicians that will actually put the policies in place to incentivize a green economy. That's what we need.
Yes, well, you need the government. You need a government that will do what the people want, but to know what
we know, there's so much. This is all. These reports are all over the place. We've been doing these for 20, 30, 40 years now, and we've seen real success cases. So this sort of stuff exists. What we need is politicians who are listening to us, and we're not electing them. And when we do elect them, then why aren't we demanding that they're listening to us? I mean, right now, I mean, we've de-greened Halifax. We've managed to sort of we don't have a responsive political system here, and we're all responsible for that. And that's where, as community, in terms of community action, that's I think where we really need to lend ourselves, because it's about policies that are going to change. It's policies that will change this. It's policies that create the green economy.
Do we need a green party at the provincial level?
I don't even think it has to be a green party. I think every single politician, no matter what party they're in, should be forced to face up to this, and we can basically lobby and demand that.
Yeah, and I quite agree with you that there's a political process there, and I agree about the specific. There's two levels here. There's both the vision, I guess, or the strategy, and then there's the specifics. For example, you mentioned about Nova Scotia Power. If it wouldn't solve all the problems, but if we could come back,
we could all just join as shareholders and vote and change.
Yeah, there's a whole range of but you're right. We need some kind of political processes, but there are some measures that can also be worked on with whatever government's there, at least to put forward ideas. If enough people were to say, just as one item, let's get that world-leading ComFit, renewable energy promoting, community engaging structure back again that we had just a couple months ago, that would be one small step in the right direction. I agree it doesn't deal with all, the whole political scene, but that would be one measure to get back to being a world leader on something that we had a couple of months ago. It's just a small, one item, but it's there. I'm going to leave you with, in spite of needing specifics on it, leave you with that vision to ponder, and I hope you can ponder it over some refreshments, because even if you have to leave right away, grab something on your way out, okay? But if you can stay, please do that, and we'd like to talk some more. Thanks very much.